Canada has 10 provinces. On paper, they're all part of the same country. Same passport, same flag, same anthem playing before hockey games nobody outside this country watches. But here's the contradiction nobody wants to put on a tourism brochure. The gap between the best Canadian province and the worst is bigger than the gap between some entire countries. Different economies, different tax brackets, housing markets that vary by a factor of 5, different healthcare wait times, climates that range from Mediterranean light to your eyelashes will freeze together by February. Same country, wildly different lives. For 2026, the underlying story has shifted. Canada's population actually contracted in the final quarter of 2025, the largest quarterly decline Statistics Canada has ever recorded, driven by a sharp pullback in non-permanent residents after federal policy changes. Most provinces shrank. The ones that didn't are now the ones doing the absorbing. Provinces that were untouchable 5 years ago are buckling under affordability pressure. Provinces everyone wrote off as flyover country had a brief boom and are now cooling. And one province on the prairies has spent 3 straight years quietly pulling Canadians toward it in a way the national conversation hasn't fully processed. This isn't a tourism list. This is a ranked breakdown of all 10 provinces measured against what actually matters when you're choosing where to plant your life. Housing you can afford, work you can find, healthcare you can access, weather you can survive, and a community that doesn't dissolve the second you move in. Some of these will surprise you. The province at number 1 is not the one most international YouTube videos pick, because most of those videos are made by people who've never lived through a Canadian winter or tried to find a family doctor in this country in 2026. 10 provinces, 10th to 1st. Let's go. 6 categories. Each province weighed against all 6. Housing affordability, actual median price against actual median income, plus rent and property tax. Job market depth, industry diversity and wage growth, not just the headline unemployment number. Healthcare access, family doctor availability is the canary in the coal mine for Canadian healthcare in 2026, and the gap between provinces is no longer subtle. Climate and livability. Length of winter, wildfire, and flood exposure, the things Canadians pretend don't matter until they do. Community and culture, and this category matters more than it did a year ago, because when most provinces just posted their first population declines in years, the question of who's still actively absorbing newcomers becomes a real signal. And future trajectory, where this province is going to be in 5 years, not where it was in 2019. 6 categories, 10 provinces, 1 ranking.
Coming in at number 10, and somebody in the comments is already typing furiously, Newfoundland and Labrador. This is not a province without merit. The coastline is staggering. The people are, by most accounts, the warmest in the country. You can still buy a salt box house and an outport for the price of a used Honda Civic. The culture is intact in a way most of Canada has lost. But this is a 2026 ranking, not a vacation pitch. Newfoundland and Labrador has lost more of its population to interprovincial migration than any other province since records began in the early 1970s, and the province lost residents again in the 4th quarter of 2025. The job market outside St. John's is thin to non-existent. Fishing isn't what it was, oil is volatile, and the per capita debt picture is genuinely concerning. Healthcare is a serious problem. The Our Care 2025 survey found roughly 3 in 10 Newfoundlanders without a family doctor or nurse practitioner, putting the province in the bottom tier nationally. Labrador's ferry-dependent communities are functionally cut off for parts of the year. Winters aren't the coldest in Canada, the coastal climate softens that, but they're the longest in psychological terms. The wind, the dampness, the gray months that don't end. If you have a remote job, no kids in the school system, and you're chasing space and silence and an ocean view that costs less than a parking spot in Vancouver, Newfoundland will give you all of that. It just won't give you a career, easy healthcare, or a population trend that suggests your community will still be there in 20 years. 10th place. Stunning country. Hard place to build a future in 2026.
Number 9.
New Brunswick. 5 years ago, this was the province Canadians joked about forgetting existed. Then the pandemic happened, remote workers from Toronto looked at house prices, and Moncton, Fredericton, and St. John saw real estate spike harder than almost anywhere in the country. The cheap province era dollar range in early 2026, with the benchmark up over 5% year over year, making it both Canada's cheapest province on average and one of the few where prices were still actively climbing, while Ontario and BC corrected downward. Outside the cities, you can still find modest small-town houses well below that average. The honest case for New Brunswick? It's the only officially bilingual province, the coastline is underrated, and the cost of living remains one of the gentler ones in the country. The honest case against? The Our Care 2025 survey found only about 65% of New Brunswickers have a family doctor or nurse practitioner, one of the worst rates in the country. And the province posted a record $1.3 billion deficit in its early 2026 fiscal update. Population had been growing on the back of remote work in-migration, but New Brunswick lost about 1,000 residents in the final quarter of 2025, its first quarterly decline since 2017. Whether that's a one-quarter blip or the start of something is the open question, though if federal immigration cuts continue, the most plausible reading is that the easy growth era is over. For retirees and remote workers willing to trade career ceiling for lower stress, New Brunswick still works. For someone climbing professionally outside government or healthcare, it'll frustrate you. 9th place.
Number 8. Prince Edward Island. PEI is beautiful. That's not in dispute. Red cliffs, rolling farmland, a coastline you can drive end to end in an afternoon. The problem is that the rest of the country figured that out, and PEI's housing market has become one of the most distorted in Canada relative to local wages. People earning island salaries cannot, in many cases, afford island houses anymore. What works here? The pace. The summers are some of the best in Canada. Warm, long, oceanside, and not on fire, which puts it ahead of half the country these days. Community is dense and real. What doesn't work? Scale and healthcare. By one major measure, PEI's primary care situation is the worst in the country. The Our Care 2025 survey found only about 62% of islanders have a family doctor or nurse practitioner, the lowest rate of any province. Finding primary care is a multi-year project for new arrivals. The job market is built around tourism, agriculture, fisheries, and government, which means it's small and shock-prone. Worth noting, PEI was the fastest-growing province in Canada by percentage just 2 years ago, peaking at over 4% annual growth in late 2023. That story has reversed sharply. By the third quarter of 2025, PEI recorded its first negative net international migration in over 2 decades, and the province actually shrank in the fourth quarter of 2025. The infrastructure built, or not built, to handle the boom is still catching up to the population that arrived during it. 8th place. A province whose growth window has clearly closed faster than anyone expected. And what that implies for the next 5 years is a question island policymakers are openly worrying about.
Now, Manitoba. Number 7. Manitoba remains one of the more affordable provinces in Canada when you measure income against housing. Winnipeg's average home price was sitting around $400,000 in early 2026, with detached houses closer to $450,000 and condos in the high $200,000s, which still puts the city in a different conversation than Toronto or Vancouver, even if the days of under $300K for a real house are mostly gone for detached. The provincial economy is more diversified than people give it credit for. Agriculture, manufacturing, aerospace, finance, healthcare, mining. Healthcare is a mixed picture. Manitoba was climbing out of a record physician shortage through 2025 with a net gain of around 164 doctors, mostly internationally trained. Meaningful progress, though provincial projections suggest hundreds could still be lost to retirement and relocation over the next 3 years. Based on what we know about the recruitment pipeline, the most plausible reading is that Manitoba's primary care situation will stabilize before it improves dramatically. But let's be honest about the other side. Winters in Manitoba are not winters in the way Vancouver pretends to have winters. They are an event. -30 for weeks at a stretch is normal. Pre-flooding is recurring in parts of the Red River Valley, and the wildfire smoke seasons hitting Western Canada have not spared Manitoba. Outside Winnipeg and a handful of secondary towns, Manitoba thins out fast. Healthcare access in northern Manitoba is among the worst in the country, and the gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities in services and infrastructure is one of the most documented inequalities in the Federation. If you can handle the climate and stay reasonably close to Winnipeg, Manitoba in 2026 is one of the best value per dollar lives available in Canada. 7th place.
6th, Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan is having a moment. Quietly, the provincial economy has been one of the more resilient in Canada through the recent inflation cycle. Potash, agriculture, energy, and a Saskatoon startup scene that, based on funding announcements and tech employer growth, looks like it may be in the early stages of becoming a small but real prairie tech cluster. The province has been posting modest overall population gains in 2025, even though Saskatchewan still loses a steady trickle of residents to Alberta. The old prairie pull westward hasn't gone away. It's just been more than offset by international arrivals. Housing is the headline. Regina and Saskatoon offer some of the best price-to-income ratios in the country, with Saskatchewan's benchmark home price up over 6% year-over-year in early 2026, among the strongest gains in Canada, but still off a low base. You can move to Saskatoon, find work in a real industry, and buy a real house without taking a vow of financial poverty. Now, nobody mentions this part. Saskatchewan winters make Manitoba winters look reasonable. Weeks where the temperature does not climb above -25. The wind on the open prairie is a force of nature most Canadians have never actually encountered. Summers can flip the script. Heat waves, drought, and wildfire smoke from the north drifting into the cities for weeks. Healthcare is mid-tier nationally, not as strained as the Atlantic, not as well-resourced as Ontario or BC. Rural specialist access involves real geographic distance. The question for Saskatchewan is whether the current growth phase is durable or temporary. The answer in 2026 looks more like the former, and that's why this province is climbing rankings it used to sit at the bottom of. 6th place, the most underrated province in the country.
Halfway through. Number 5. Nova Scotia. Nova Scotia in 2026 is a province in transition. Halifax has become a real city, fast. Population growth in the metro area was among the strongest in Canada through 2023 and 2024. The downtown filled in, the food and art scene became legitimate, and the universities anchor a stream of young talent that increasingly stuck around instead of fleeing west. Nova Scotia also lost about 1,400 residents in the final quarter of 2025, its first quarterly decline since 2020, so the boom is clearly cooling. The catch is that Halifax housing has become punishing. The bargain era ended around 2021 and never came back. Rents in Halifax are now closer to Ottawa than they are to Moncton. People moving from Toronto still find it cheap. Lifelong Nova Scotians are watching their kids get priced out of their own hometowns. Outside Halifax, the picture changes. Cape Breton, the South Shore, the Annapolis Valley, these are still places where housing makes sense, and the coastline is a daily luxury. One genuinely positive note, Nova Scotia's primary care numbers have improved meaningfully thanks to a multi-year provincial investment in interdisciplinary clinics. The Our Care 2025 survey put the province at roughly 80% family doctor or nurse practitioner access, close to the national average and better than its Atlantic neighbors. Climate is gentle by Canadian standards, maritime winters that are wet and gray rather than catastrophically cold. Hurricanes are now a real seasonal consideration in a way they weren't 20 years ago. Nova Scotia's biggest asset in 2026 might be its trajectory of investment. The economy is diversifying, the cultural scene is real, and the province has a coherent identity that some larger provinces have lost. 5th place,
a province that's earned its rise, and a province where buying a house has gotten harder than its reputation still suggests.
Number 4. Quebec. Quebec, on paper, is one of the best deals in North America. Montreal has held the line on housing affordability better than any other major Canadian city. Quebec's benchmark prices were up close to 7% year-over-year in early 2026, and the provincial average sat in the mid-$500,000. But compared to Toronto or Vancouver, it's still a different universe. You can rent a real apartment in a real Montreal neighborhood for what a parking spot costs in Yaletown. The cultural argument is overwhelming. Quebec is the only place in North America where you can live a fully French-speaking professional life with full access to a modern G7 economy. The food, the festivals, the architecture, the density of arts and music. Daycare is subsidized in a way no other province matches. Parental leave is more generous. The social safety net is, by most reasonable measures, the strongest in Canada. Here's what the brochure doesn't tell you. Taxes. Quebec taxes more than any other province, and it isn't subtle. If you're a high earner, your take-home pay will visibly shrink the moment you cross the provincial line. The language laws are real and have tightened in recent years. If you're moving with school-aged children and you don't speak French, you need to understand exactly what the rules are before you sign anything. Healthcare in Quebec is variable. Montreal has world-class hospitals. Rural Quebec has wait times that rival the worst in the country. The Our Care 2025 survey found that only about 68% of Quebecers report having a regular family doctor, nurse practitioner, or primary care clinic, one of the lowest rates in Canada, despite the province having one of the highest medical school class sizes per capita. The most plausible reading of that contradiction is that policy and structural choices, not raw doctor supply, are doing most of the damage. For families and culture seekers who value social infrastructure over disposable income, Quebec is one of the smartest moves in Canada. For a high-earning Anglophone chasing maximum take-home, it isn't. 4th place.
3rd place, Ontario. Ontario is the economic center of Canada. That isn't opinion, it's the structure of the federation. The job market is the deepest, the industries are the most diversified, the universities are strong. The airports connect to everywhere, and the cultural diversity of the GTA is one of the most globally connected environments in North America. Healthcare is more complicated than the boosters admit. The Ontario Medical Association reported in late 2025 that more than 2.5 million Ontarians do not have a family physician, and over half of currently practicing Ontario family doctors say they're considering retirement within 5 years. Ontario, along with Alberta, is one of only 2 provinces with fewer family doctors per capita than it had a decade ago. The Ontario healthcare advantage some people still believe in is, based on the actual data, quietly eroding. So why isn't Ontario number 1? Because the cost of living in southern Ontario in 2026 has reached a level that breaks the math for most people. The GTA is one of the least affordable housing markets in the developed world relative to local incomes. Toronto's average home price hovered around $1.2 million through late 2025, and Ontario's benchmark was actually down close to 7% year-over-year by early 2026, which sounds like relief until you realize it's still nowhere near affordable for the median household. The dream of buying a starter home in southern Ontario on a southern Ontario median income is functionally over without inheritance. Northern Ontario is a different country. Sudbury, Thunder Bay, Sault Ste. Marie, affordable housing, slower pace, real communities, and the same rural Canada healthcare and infrastructure pressures. The deeper structural story Ontario boosters won't say out loud, the province has been losing more residents to interprovincial migration than any other province in Canada for 15 straight quarters. People are voting with their moving trucks. What that could imply for Ontario's long-term trajectory is something every potential mover should sit with. 3rd place, held back by its own success.
Number 2, Alberta. And this might be the most important repositioning in this entire ranking. For 2 decades, Alberta was where Canadians went to make money, period. Oil sands, fast wages, no provincial sales tax. That story still exists, but in 2026, it's been joined by something more interesting. Alberta is now also a real lifestyle play. Calgary and Edmonton have matured into livable cities, diverse, culturally active, with real food and arts scenes. The mountains are an hour from Calgary, which is something no other major Canadian city can offer at any price. Housing is the headline. Alberta is the only major economy province in Canada where a median income household can still realistically buy a single-family home in a major city. Calgary's average home price was sitting around $628,000 in early 2026, with Edmonton closer to $455,000, both dramatically below Toronto and Vancouver, while Alberta wages remain higher than almost anywhere else. The job market has diversified beyond oil and gas in a way the rest of the country hasn't fully clocked. Tech, logistics, agriculture, renewable energy, finance. Statistics Canada migration data tells the cleanest version of the story. Alberta has been the top net destination for Canadians moving between provinces for 12 straight quarters, 3 full years, and the province crossed the 5 million population mark in 2025. Most incoming migrants come from Ontario, Saskatchewan, and British Columbia, in that order. Downside, the climate. Alberta winters are real prairie winters, punctuated by Chinooks that yo-yo the temperature in ways your sinuses will not appreciate. Wildfire smoke has become a serious summer issue. Healthcare in Alberta has been strained, and the political climate around healthcare delivery has been turbulent in ways that affect day-to-day access. Despite all of that, the math is too good to ignore. Alberta in 2026 offers the best income-to-housing ratio of any province, with a real economy attached to it. Second place, the most pragmatic move on the board for working-age Canadians.
And number 1, British Columbia. Before the comments fill up with people pointing at Vancouver real estate prices, yes, we see it, hear out the case. BC takes the top spot not because it's the most affordable, not because it has the easiest job market, but because when you weigh all 6 categories together, no other province offers the combination of climate, economy, livability, and trajectory that BC does. Start with climate. The southern coast has the mildest winters in Canada by an enormous margin. Snow is occasional, temperatures stay above freezing most of the season. The cost is rain, and a lot of it, but for anyone who has lived through a prairie February, the rain is a bargain. The economy is more diversified than people realize. The Vancouver tech corridor, the film industry, the port economy, agriculture in the interior, tourism, and a growing clean energy sector give BC depth most Canadians underestimate. Wages in fields that pay well are competitive. Healthcare in BC was, for years, one of the worst stories in the country, smallest medical school class sizes per capita and one of the highest percentages of residents without a family doctor. That story has been rewritten faster than almost anyone expected. The Our Care 2025 survey found that roughly 83% of British Columbians now report having a family doctor or nurse practitioner, up from 71% in 2022. Making BC the most improved province in Canada on that measure. International physician recruitment, particularly from the United States, accelerated through 2025 and contributed meaningfully to the turnaround. This could imply that political will to fix primary care actually moves the needle when sustained for a few years. Outside Vancouver, the province changes character entirely. The Okanagan, the Kootenays, Vancouver Island, north of Victoria, the Sunshine Coast, these regions offer lifestyles that compete with anywhere on the continent at prices nothing like the Lower Mainland. The catch is the obvious one. Housing in Metro Vancouver is among the least affordable in the world. Greater Vancouver's average sale price was around $1.2 million in early 2026, and even though prices have actually been declining year over year, BC's benchmark off more than 5% versus the previous February, that correction is happening from a level so high it barely registers as relief.
The smart move in BC is increasingly to skip Vancouver entirely and land somewhere in the interior or on the island. Two more honest concerns. Wildfire risk. Interior BC has had some of the worst wildfire seasons in Canadian history recently, and that risk isn't going away. And the population picture has actually softened. BC lost residents in the fourth quarter of 2025, driven mostly by a sharp drop in non-permanent residents and a continued slow trickle of out-migration to Alberta. Based on what we know about how long the Vancouver affordability crisis has been pushing people east, the most plausible reading is that this is the long tail of that pressure finally showing up in the headline numbers, rather than something fundamentally new. First place, not because it's perfect, but because no other province offers this combination of climate, opportunity, and lifestyle ceiling.
So that's the ranking. 10th to 1st. Newfoundland to British Columbia. One country that turns out to contain 10 almost completely different lives, depending on which line on the map you happen to live inside. Here's what most ranking videos won't tell you. The best province question is the wrong question. The right question is, best for whom? Doing what, at what stage of life, with what tolerance for which trade-off? A retired couple with a paid-off house in Halifax is living a better life than a young family drowning in a Toronto mortgage, even though Ontario ranks higher on this list. A remote working software developer in Saskatchewan has a better quality of life ratio than almost anyone in Metro Vancouver, even though BC takes first place. Rankings are starting points, not verdicts. What this ranking actually tells you is something more structural. Statistics Canada reported that the country's population declined by over 100,000 people in the fourth quarter of 2025, the largest quarterly decline on record, driven by a sharp drop in non-permanent residents after federal policy changes. Most provinces shrank that quarter. Alberta was effectively the only province with meaningful net growth. The provinces that were assumed to be permanent winners are creaking under affordability pressure. The provinces that were assumed to be permanent backwaters had a brief boom that's now cooling. And one province, Alberta, is sitting at the center of 3 straight years of net interprovincial migration gains in a way that, based on what we can see in the data, looks less like a cycle and more like a structural reordering. What that could imply for the next decade of Canadian regional politics is one of the more interesting open questions in the country right now. So the real question for you: which of these provinces actually fits the life you're trying to build? Not the life you're told to want, the real one. The one with the bills and the winters and the family doctor search and the commute and the community. Drop your pick in the comments. Tell us which province you'd actually move to in 2026 and why. And if you found this useful, the channel does this kind of rural and regional Canadian breakdown every week. Subscribe so the next one finds you. Same country, 10 different lives. Choose carefully.